Hi, and welcome to another episode of our In Dialogue series. Today we have with us Dr. LeAnne Steen from the University of Loyola. I'm going to read here just to make sure I have it correct, but you are the Department Chair and Associate Professor of the Department of Counseling at Loyola University in New Orleans, but you're also the founding director of the Endowed Play Therapy Center at Loyola. And we were chatting before we got on camera about your kind of history of working with play therapy and working with families, and you're really passionate right now about caregiver education.
Yeah, caregiver education, I think, is such an important piece of the big picture because as caregivers feel more confident, that trickles down to their family, and the children that they're working with, that they're helping inside and raising inside their family.
Definitely. Yeah, and today we're talking about navigating difficult family situations. So that's really where we wanted to kind of bring you in with that expertise of caregiver education, because we have the holidays are coming up. We're going to be around people that we might not be around all the time. So I wanted to just ask, maybe, what are some common family situations or difficulties that you and your interns are noticing?
I mean, families are so complex. There can be a lot of difficult situations that can come up with just even different parenting styles. So, as you're going out into like extended family situations, you may have a different way of parenting your child than maybe one of your siblings has. And then y'all are all joining up at your parents' house, and everybody is having different ways of managing the kids that are around them. And sometimes people may feel judged, or you may be feeling like judging another family member, so kind of thinking about like where you want to be in that big picture of how y'all come together and having respect for different parenting styles and different ways of navigating the family. And it can be really easy to, from the outside, maybe think that, oh, if that was your kid that was having that difficulty right now, that you would have a way to handle it, because it's really hard to see the bigger picture of how complicated things can be whenever you're just getting a snapshot. And these environments also can be very stimulating for a lot of the kids, and there's more sugar and, treats and stuff like that around. So sometimes kids are a little, wound up.
Yeah. So you said, some of the ones that I heard were maybe different parenting styles with your siblings, or even maybe the friends that you're visiting, different maybe generational parenting styles are common things that we're seeing. And then even just like the busyness and kind of the novelty of this new situation, with it like sweets or like a rambunctious, I guess, stimulating environment,
like things may be loud, football games may be on, people may be yelling. And it could be people excited, but everybody's like coming together. And I mean, I guess I'm thinking about things that happened in my family too, but like, kids are running around, treats sometimes are just easy to grab. So
when the caregivers come, and like we're thinking about this situation that might be happening, how can you prepare? How can you kind of help your kids through it? What are some things that you might share with the caregiver to deal with that?
I think that you probably need to do kind of a mental inventory of what you feel like are the places where you're going to feel really comfortable and accepted. And then if there's spaces or places where you're concerned. And kind of, I guess, be mindful about how you're navigating through that. So if there are spaces where you're not sure that you're going to be as comfortable, or that maybe you felt judged in the past, or that you felt like people were reprimanding your kids in ways that you didn't appreciate, I don't know, I'm just kind of coming up with things, but like, then, I think it's important that you try to have conversations on the front end about things that you're concerned about. So if you're, for example, if I was going to go to my own caregiver's house and I was confused, and I was concerned that the caregiver who had raised me was going to reprimand my kid in a way that I didn't appreciate, then I would call my caregiver in advance,
Yeah.
my own mother, father, whoever, and say, hey, I really need you to try to use this kind of language or to try to do
Right.
this whenever we're around. I know that it's different than the way you raised me, but would you mind giving this a shot? This is how we help our child regulate. Can you try that with me and see if that helps?
Yeah.
And see if they're willing to participate. And if they're not willing to participate, then you have at least you can make informed choices.
Right.
About like how long you want to stay there and things like that.
Yeah, so it really sounds like, that pre-work, I love what you said, like the mental inventory, just kind of visualizing like what situation we're walking into, what might be some of the things that could come up, and then doing that kind of, it's a little bit vulnerable to ask ahead of time, like, hey, I'm asking you to help me with this. And if that person is unwilling, then putting that boundary or limitation on the amount of time, or even maybe this isn't the right year for us to come.
And also talking to the kids. So if you know that Uncle so-and-so tends to be a little gruff and that you have a very sensitive child, then maybe you talk to your child in advance about, hey, Uncle so-and-so is kind of gruff. And for a lot of people feel a little like, when he says stuff to them, I feel that way sometimes. Have you ever felt that way? And if you pre-talk to them and y'all even maybe role play like some things, then they're mentally prepared for it too. So you can also be prepping your children for some of the environments that they're going to be walking into.
Right.
And if, there's somebody who, sometimes can, be scary or abrupt in ways that sometimes takes kids off guard, then you have that chance to prepare them for it and maybe practice and maybe even make it fun and playful.
Yeah.
And then if they do encounter that situation, they've already scripted how they want to respond. So if they want to have something to say, or if they just want to turn around and go a different direction, or what they want to do. But y'all have strategized.
Right. And it's kind of giving kids that autonomy to, instead of, just walking into this maybe like chaotic situation, to have that strategy of, my mom warned me about this, or whoever.
Even like something like dogs. Like let's say you have a child that's afraid of dogs. So maybe you would call in advance and say, my child's really afraid of dogs. We had this situation a couple years ago. Are you okay with putting your dog away? And let's say they say yes. Then, but there's a chance that dog's going to get out with if there's, multiple people around the house. So then maybe you go back to your child. You're like, the dog's going to be put away. But if the dog gets out, how do we want to respond to that? So that everybody's kind of has a strategy and a plan.
Right. Yeah, I love that idea, again, of just like that pre-work. And then when you're there, and let's say the dog gets out, and maybe we didn't plan for something, or something unexpected comes up, and your kid is like melting. How can caregivers kind of help in that scenario?
Well, at that point in time, then their child, you are the regulator. So you may be upset that the dog got out, or that you felt like somebody was irresponsible, but really in that moment, the best thing that you can do is orient to your child and be, we call it a thermostat. Like that, in your house, how do you regulate the temperature? You use the thermostat.
Right.
And so one of the things that we say is be a thermostat, not a thermometer. If you're a thermometer, so your child's got dysregulated because of the dog. If you follow your child, you become dysregulated too, then your child has no way to regulate too.
Right.
See what I'm saying? So even though you may be upset about the situation, it's best for you to try to stay as regulated as possible. And then if it's a young child, pick them up, remove them from the dog, go to a room, go outside, go someplace different. If it's an older child, walk them to another space. And then once they're regulated, y'all can talk about whether or not y'all are going to stay.
Yeah.
And what your next steps are going to be.
Right.
Where you go from there.
Right. Yeah, so it's a lot of emotional awareness and the ability to kind of have those, again, conversations ahead of time. And then when you start to feel maybe overwhelmed, having a conversation ahead of time about that too. Like, how will you know when you need to come get me? So that we don't get to this place of, yeah, like we're freaking out, you know? But if we are finding that quiet space or safe person to...
Yeah, having a couple people maybe identified and then a space to go to. And bringing with your child anything they need. So again, I think it's important that if we're going into other people's houses, that we have conversations with them in advance. You don't want to already be at the house and then asking them, do they mind putting their dog away? You know, so it's better to talk to them about it in advance and see how they feel about it. And it can keep resentments from developing, you know, about the situation. But also, like, if your child has, like, sensory needs and gets really stimulated by sounds and things like that, then make sure you bring the tools that you have. Like, if y'all use headphones and for noise counseling purposes and, you know, anything that, if there's a special blanket, you know, something that helps them feel calm, that you try to pack that little bag with you and do your best to have that along.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that can be a big limiting factor for some families is, like, if my kid has this kind of big fear of, we're using dogs a lot, but like if my kid's really afraid of dogs or if they do have that sensory need, that can really be a stressful, like it can feel like a burden on the parent or the caregiver as they are approaching maybe like a family holiday or even a work party or, you know, whatever it may be. So yeah, having that kind of plan ahead of time, maybe setting a day like the weekend before to say like, you know, here's the list of what we're going to do, how we're going to prepare, and then bringing your kid into that conversation.
Yeah, when the kids get to participate, I think it really helps them feel like empowered and gives them that sense of autonomy. And they might have some good ideas that you wouldn't have thought of. And also like what might help you feel calm while we're there. And maybe they're like, Play-Doh. Okay, well then we'll make sure we put some Play-Doh in our little bag that we're going to take with us. So just little things like that like can be really helpful to prepare everybody. And I know everybody's busy. It's the holiday season. I'm like, but it's sometimes that like that little bit of work before can make the while you're there so much more enjoyable.
Definitely.
And it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay as a caregiver to decide that maybe one year you skip something because you feel like it's not going to be a good match for your family for that year. And it's okay. You know, I mean, like I guess I want everybody to have permission that it's, you know, you can take care of yourself, you can have boundaries, and then you can make informed decisions. And sometimes it's a negotiation. You set a boundary and they're like, well, we can't do it this way, but we can do this. Or, you know, whatever it is. Then at least y'all can decide how to go from there.
Yeah. Can you define boundaries a little bit more? Because I think that that's something that is so vital in this conversation, but maybe we don't have the best idea of it because at least for me, South Louisiana, I'm from here. My family's very involved in like all of our lives. So it can feel really scary and hard to have a boundary. So can you help us understand a little bit?
Yes, it is scary. It's very intimidating often to try to, especially with people you've known throughout your whole life, to broach asking them to maybe do something different or a different kind of way. So let's say you have a child with sensory issues and that like loudness can be a bit much. And families all coming together can be kind of loud and things can clang and stuff like that. And we can't necessarily control all of that. But maybe you also know that the TV is also really loud and that, you know, there are a couple things that could be controlled more. So having a conversation on the front end, asking like, would they be willing to have the TV at a lower level? And would they be willing to be mindful that your child has a sensory issue where loud things can be really overstimulating for them, and seeing how they feel about that. So that would be like the first step of setting a boundary is just broaching the topic. And then from there can be negotiation. Now, if they say, no, then they're not willing to follow your boundary,
Mm-hmm.
or to even negotiate where that boundary could be.
Right.
I don't know if I'm helping, but you're right.
Yeah.
Boundaries are kind of elusive. Like, what does that mean
Mm-hmm.
exactly?
Mm-hmm.
But it is about you communicating what you, or in this case, as a caregiver, your family's needs
Mm-hmm.
are.
Mm-hmm.
And then if people can't accommodate that in some way, then maybe that's not the thing that you do.
Right. Right.
Or you can also shorten how long you're there.
Right.
So maybe it's more like a stop in and we say hi to everybody.
Right.
Maybe you arrive right when the meal is ready instead of for the 2 hours before the meal is ready.
Mm-hmm.
So y'all share a meal and then you leave. Like maybe
Right.
it's a little more calm during that time because people are sitting and chit-chatting. So you can also figure out those kinds of ways to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And your child or children, and
Right.
also enjoy getting to spend some time with your extended family.
Right. And that can be, like you were saying, kind of there is that opportunity at the front end of the negotiation with the other party.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe like if that other family member or situation is not changeable, then you start thinking about, okay, well, how can I make this work for me and our needs? And if it's not possible, then maybe we decide, like you have the permission to decide not to do something. Even though you might be hearing the opposite from someone else. But yeah, I love the kind of personal, like, all right, well, if the TV can't be off, then yeah, we come right when the meal is, because I know that's usually when we're in the other room. Or we limit the amount of time. Like it's a really good kind of internal compromise that you're going to make, and if someone's not willing to compromise with you on the outside.
And I know some of these family traditions go way back, and
Right.
people really love them, and they don't want to necessarily modify or make a variation of them. And if that's the case, and you still want to participate, then you can figure out how to make variations on your side. Is basically,
Right.
Especially if what you're trying to do is help your child have an enjoyable experience. So maybe the next year they can go a little bit longer.
Right.
Maybe y'all can build up where over time they can become more used to the way the family is operating or the larger family is operating.
Yeah, I think this is just a great opportunity to kind of self-reflect too, of like, if this is a difficult situation that you've been in before, that you've had to learn how to deal with over years and times, and you remember the angst of it all, and you're grappling with the thought of putting your child through that, this is the perfect opportunity to kind of start changing that narrative and changing that situation moving forward of like, okay, I had to learn how I cope with this, and I'm not willing to put my kid through that whole rigmarole,
Yeah.
And so again, like you have the ability to do that as the parent. And I think that we forget that when we're with our own parents.
Well, yeah, because you kind of fall back in your own role. And so, but recognizing that you can, you have permission to set boundaries.
Right. Yeah, and Holly.
So my question was sort of based on boundaries. What I feel like is kind of boundaries' little sister is routine. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that too, just in terms of either preparing children for the fact that their routine might be a little bit different when they get there, or just sort of navigating, especially if you're staying with relatives.
Right.
Routine's gonna get, kind of squirrely. And so just sort of either how to prepare for that in advance or how to navigate it when it happens, because there's that compromise that has to come.
Right.
Like you're not the only people staying in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, routines are great, and it can help kids feel a lot more comfortable, I guess, like the predictability of everything. But also sometimes it can be fun to be like, kind of like, oh, we're on vacation and let's not be in such a deep routine, And so I think it would be, helpful to again, mental inventory with yourself, but then also maybe collaboratively with the kids. Like, what are the things about our routines that you really like that help, the most or whatever. And then also like, where are some places that we can be relaxed, but you have to kind of know where your limits are too. Like, are you okay to let your kids stay up, extra on every night or only like on one or two nights? Like, you got to figure that kind of stuff out. And if you know that when your child doesn't get enough sleep, that causes them to be extra stimulated the next day, then maybe sleep is a priority, that you really stick to within the context of your routines while you're traveling and even when you're staying with other people. So having, a place set aside where hopefully they can have a quiet place to go to sleep at something close to their regular bedtime. Listen, you got to give yourself grace too. Like, you can't expect everything to be perfect. And if you're trying to be that rigid, you are going to make yourself miserable. Like, so don't do that either. But like figuring out like, all right, well, my child usually goes to bed at 7:30 on, the school year. But I'm going to make the compromise that as long as I get them to bed between like 8:30 and 9, that's going to be probably enough because they don't have to get up and get ready for school in the morning. So, especially if your child like really, really, really needs that sleep. And so I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
No, I think that's great. Just being aware of it and knowing that that's something you need to think about.
But other things add into the routine too. Like, again, like it, my kids, so we traveled a lot during the holidays, because I'm not originally from here. They want to take like 20 stuffed animals, when we go. And I'm like, okay, we can take, let's take an amount that we could probably bring all of them back. Because if we take 20, we're going to leave 5 on the road, And so, negotiating those kinds of things too, because sometimes like even just the little things that they like to have around them when they're sleeping can help them sleep in unusual places. So the blanket, the special pillow, but then you even may want to have a written down inventory list so that as you're leaving to go from one place to another, that you sort of check off to make sure that your child has gotten all the things that they brought. And so that's why I had that limit with my kids, that it couldn't be 20 because I didn't know that I could keep up with 20 things, much less them. But I felt like, 5 things I could keep up with. And whether it was like a few stuffed animals, a special pillow, a blanket, whatever. And then we usually managed to make it like go to my friend's house, then go stay at my brother's house and, go a couple of different places over the holidays and still make it home with all 5 things. And but it also helped them feel a lot more comfortable when we were at sleeping in different beds and, kind of.
And, there was an astronaut that just went to space and she could only bring what would fit in this very small container. So maybe that could be an element like, just like that.
You could fit it in this container.
Yeah, it has to fit inside here. Whatever can be in there, and then it can zip up.
Yeah. And then it just goes from place to place. Like a backpack is usually like kind of what we would use, like a little backpack that was there just for them backpack. If you could fit it in this, and then we had to write it all down.
That's awesome. I love that idea of even just having like, okay, what's in your backpack? And like maybe even stuffing it with like, because we've talked about kind of in this kind of conversation about navigating family situations, we've talked about the pre-work. So like before you get there, what can we do to anticipate or prepare? We've also talked about like the kind of during work of like, how do I self-regulate if something's gone wrong? Where do we think, like, how do you recommend kind of following up if something does go wrong or, unideally?
Well, I mean, like I said, first of all, you got to try to regulate yourself and make sure that, you're able to help your child and, or children, regulate if something is going wrong. If you have, a partner or somebody available to process with, that's probably ideal. But not everybody has that. We have a lot of single parents. So if there's even another person that you feel comfortable with there, like a sibling or a good friend that's around, I think it'd be helpful to kind of process a little bit. Like, okay, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Did I feel like so-and-so just snapped at my child. Did I perceive that properly? Like if you need
Right.
like a sort of if you can find another person that can kind of help you process if you're perceiving things the way that they're perceiving things or whatever. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
kind of just taking a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I mean, I think would be my recommendation is
Right.
and if you're really feeling uncomfortable and personally feeling overstimulated or concerned that you may not be able to hold yourself together, then it might be time to leave. Or if there's
Mm-hmm.
a way to take a break,
Mm-hmm.
then to maybe take a break from the
Right.
situation.
Right. Yeah. So having that post processing with friend or
Even in the
partner.
spot processing, like if
Yeah.
there was somebody like, these big family things and you're kind of like signal your favorite sibling or one of
Mm-hmm.
your friends that you've known that
Mm-hmm.
happens to be around, step away for a minute.
Right.
And sometimes even just having that other person
Mm-hmm.
say, it's okay, you're gonna be
Right.
okay. I'll keep an eye out too.
Mm-hmm.
If something's happening, I'll try to interrupt, the
Right.
situation
Right.
or whatever. Like sometimes you can get like a wingman, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
to help you out. Or you
Mm-hmm.
could even you could set that in place if you feel
Yeah.
like there's somebody around that could be your wingman,
Definitely.
to help out if something is
Definitely.
getting complicated.
Mm-hmm.
People are
Yeah.
drinking, different things are happening. Sometimes people say things, or
Right.
whatever. So sometimes you could, have a wingman that kind of helps you keep maybe some
Mm-hmm.
distance from the person that tends to
Mm-hmm.
make you feel upset or
Right.
agitated.
And yeah, once you're calm, then you're able to kind of address it with your child in whatever
Mhm.
appropriate way that looks like,
Mhm.
depending on the situation.
Yeah. When I was growing up, it was Uncle Larry. He was really funny. He was my dad's brother, but he was also he scared a lot of the kids. Like he was just really
Mm-hmm.
abrupt, and so a lot of the kids would just always keep like this big, like distance from Uncle Larry.
Mm-hmm.
Like so, like talking about all this is reminding me
Yeah. Yeah.
of he's long gone. He was also a very funny and sweet man.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as we got older, I learned to appreciate him more. But when I
Right.
was a little kid,
Right.
I just thought he was like
Yeah.
a little bit scary.
Yeah.
So,
And it sounds like your parents empowered you to take that distance
oh
that
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
needed,
Just don't be around
Uh-huh.
him. Like if you don't like, there's, usually these situations, there's different areas you can go to and go hang
Mm-hmm.
out in,
Mm-hmm.
and to do different things.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. I love it. Um, yeah, I mean, I think we talked a lot about these various opportunities to navigate these maybe holiday situations, family situations. I think that these can apply in all times of the year. But
Yeah.
as we're
Hmm.
entering into this particularly busy season, I mean, even if it's we're about to have Mardi Gras season, right? Like it's
Hmm.
gonna be
Hmm.
it's gonna be a holiday for a long time in the city. So we wanted to kind of touch on that right now. Do you have any kind of maybe final suggestions or tips for parents?
Well, one thing I was thinking, like, just while we were talking just now, is that, like, on the flip side, like, there is some stuff that, like, family does, like, help us build sometimes, like, some tolerance for different kinds of personality styles and
Mm-hmm.
different kinds of things. And so, letting your child sometimes experience those even in small amounts and then kind of building up. Like, I don't want
Yeah.
us to necessarily be saying, oh, like just, abandon all efforts, like, or for that to be the kind of message. I think
Mm-hmm.
instituting routines, coming prepared, and having conversations that might help. See if you can get some people who are willing to kind of like
Right.
help you
Right.
navigate the situations,
Mm-hmm.
and then on top of that, recognizing that it's also an opportunity for your children to experience, lots of different personalities
Mm-hmm.
and, build that tolerance for different types of
Yeah.
personalities
Mm-hmm.
and,
And resilience, really.
resilience
Yeah.
and yeah, maybe some skills or,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, y'all can kind of role play and come up with like some ways to respond to situations that you anticipate could happen that might be a
Right.
little unique compared to what your child
Right.
experiences when they're just at home
Right.
environment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make where it's like we want to honor each of our unique personalities and ways of being, but that means that sometimes that doesn't mesh with other people's unique ways of being. And
Hmm.
you can have that conversation with your child and say, like, sometimes it might be uncomfortable, but like we're going to use this as a learning and growing experience. And if it gets too much, you have that opportunity to take the step back, go in the other room. And if you're really ready to go, like just come and talk to me, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that's important is to be thinking about if you're in a situation where you're co-caregivers and like together,
Right.
parenting together, that it's really important to try to have continuity in your caregiving, and that oftentimes if the caregivers are off of each other, like they're not using the same playbooks
Right.
in their caregiving styles, then that's very confusing for the children. And at that point, then the caregivers really need to get some help to help them get more together.
Right.
You don't have to be exactly alike, but you need to have some amount of continuity in the way that you're parenting together.
Right.
So that would be just another thing to be mindful of, is that if you're finding yourself to have very different parenting styles, it might be helpful to get some support around that, so you can find some new skills that you share together.
Yeah.
And then like kind of talk about how the other skills can be utilized and what can be adopted, by each caregiver.
Right. That's a completely important point to make too. And y'all are doing some parenting classes
groups
this summer or this spring.
In the spring, yeah, we're going to have, we have an early one. It's a parent education group called Child Parent Relationship Training. That's going to start like in January until around Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And then we have a second half of the semester one. So those, if you go to the Loyola Center for Counseling Education, you can see those groups being posted and navigation for signing up if you're interested in signing up for one of those.
Yeah.
And those are really great to help caregivers sort of build some skills together.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation, because I want to reiterate that families are complex. Like you said that at the beginning of this conversation, families are just a complex and dynamic thing. So sometimes we need more help to really learn what we need in this season of our family even. So because they change as we grow and get older. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having
on this
me.
In Dialogue session.